So now you were diagnosed at a younger age, right? And it,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
So tell me
I
about growing up with an ADHD diagnosis.
yeah, what's interesting because my brother was diagnosed as ADHD later and is like sort of throughout high school, and he like showed sort of classic symptoms, I know signs, and so obviously my parents like classic sort of story, but I showed like tendencies to have some sort of neurodivergence at an earlier, like really early age. But then I was the teacher sort of told my parents, and then I was diagnosed as having dyslexic tendencies. So um, it's interesting because I remember I think it was a year four or year three or something. I was in my class and we're learning how to write letters, and the teacher was telling us how to write the letter E like an elephant. And she wrote it on the board. And I just remember this thing of just looking at the board and then looking at my paper and looking at the kid next to me who had his whole A4 sheet with little letters E all over it. And I looked at mine and I just like, so I can't keep up with this kid. I've only got two E's. And there, I drew elephants in the shape of E's. So they had like every E had like a little tusk and horns. Like, and yeah, like it looked like a little elephant like that.
Uh,
I had like maybe three elephants, and I thought I can't keep up. I don't know how I'm gonna possibly fill the page full of elephants.
Took the teacher
So
very literally.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, that's
So
fascinating to me. My son is he's 9, he's in the 4th grade, and I had never heard of dyspraxia until recently because his teacher was really getting on him about his handwriting, and it's terrible, especially when he's stressed out and has anxiety. His I can see it, it manifests in his handwriting. And
mm.
I was noticing that like the more she told him to concentrate on his handwriting, like the harder it was for him to actually write anything, like to articulate his thoughts, like I could just see it,
Yeah,
his brain
seize up
working
or
so
something.
hard. And I felt for him. And I remember asking his teacher to be like, look, we need to lay off on this handwriting thing because
Mm.
it's really not that important. Like I think it's more important for him to be able to kind
Yeah.
of connect with his thoughts and his ability to communicate. um,
Yeah.
but then when I went back into my old report cards, I had no idea that I was also like I had no memory of this, but
Oh
apparently my
wow.
teachers had all complained about my terrible handwriting.
Oh
And
wow.
I know I had no memory of it until I had gone back to look at my old report cards. And I was like, oh,
That's
okay,
incredible.
interesting.
Yeah. So how did you get through that process of relaxing and writing, or just
I have
don't
no
even
memory
think
of my
about it?
childhood, which I think is actually not uncommon with women with
Yeah.
ADHD that have like
Yeah.
very little memory. And I don't know if it's just the trauma of,
Big
of
chunks of blank periods. Yeah.
right. Yeah. I don't know if it's really just like, feeling like feeling like you're kind of going through the motions a lot of the time as a kid. I don't like I
Yeah.
just feel I don't have very very lucid memories of any of my childhood, but I do remember my mom telling me
Yeah.
that I was originally left-handed and my kindergarten teacher forced me to become right-handed.
Oh
And so I was like,
no.
not only did
Wow.
you force me to become
That's
right-handed, but then
amazing.
you complained about my terrible handwriting. I'm like,
Yeah. What a bitch.
right? Seriously. Uh, but I was never diagnosed with anything. And so I'm curious when I
Yeah.
talk to women who were diagnosed with either dyslexia or dysgraphia or some of the other learning disabilities, they often say that like they felt a little more, I don't know what the word is, like cared for, or, that there was some kind of ways in which there were modifications made in the classroom for them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so they didn't
Totally.
necessarily have
Yeah.
that experience of like something's wrong and nobody's noticing. And so I'm curious, did you sort of
Yeah.
feel like you did you feel like you were getting extra help when you needed it, or do you feel like they were just
Oh,
way
look,
off in that diagnosis, or
I think you just have to look at the times really, and I think I was really lucky with being sort of, um, you know, identified with having learning disabilities or, you know, difficulties, and at a young age. So then that just sort of became a part of my identity, and knowing that about myself made me feel a little like more comfortable, obviously, but at the same time, the teachers had no idea how to really handle it, I think, or they were still, I got the sense that I was still a bit of a guinea pig for trying to figure out how to teach me basic English and maths and clocks, reading clocks. I only learned how to read clocks maybe a couple of months ago. And I remember multiple teachers tried teaching me how to read analog clocks, and so did the principal, and they just eventually gave up because it was just too difficult. So I think, I think, like you're saying, you don't really remember big chunks of your childhood, but I certainly remember the periods in which I felt really sort of swamped and overwhelmed, and the inability to respond to things, or just feeling that sort of disconnect from the group a lot. And it's really interesting, those sorts of things. But I'm just trying to think of another scenario. Definitely learning language, and I stopped when I got to high school. I was really lucky. I had a good group of friends, and then sort of towards the end of high school, I dropped out of maths and English just because I was just falling behind. It was the curriculum was designed to be for students who would achieve it at a certain pace, and I could just never catch up with them. So I'll constantly fall short of like 10 or 20% under like average on most of my subjects, and no matter how hard I tried, I just felt it. Never really, like my effort was never commensurate to the scores I was trying to get. So yeah, that was quite disheartening. And so I got to the point where, and I have been drawing as early as I can remember. So I guess, you know, drawing, I mean, all my test papers were covered in animals. Such a daydreamer. And it's interesting, like I can't quite discern between what's dyslexic and what's ADHD. And maybe you could help provide some insight into that as well. So I'm just trying to unpack everything. But I was such a daydreamer, and remember coming home from school once and telling Mum I had a great maths class, and then told her all about the birds that were outside and like what was happening outside. So, that was maths. So, but yeah, just really, really struggling at school. But drawing and art became a place that I would just escape to every day. So that you know, I've got a lot to thank for my school experience, because I was able to do that and had those experiences as well. So yeah, and had really good supportive teachers around me that knew I was a little different, needed some help. And I think that helped a lot, having sort of your peers and teachers that understand you, even if they can't really help you in the ways of you achieving higher marks in academia. That counts for a lot, because it just, otherwise you feel a bit more on the outside, I think. Yeah.
And so how old were you when you were diagnosed with ADHD?
I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was, I think 18.
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
so
all right.
late
And
teens.
Was your brother's experience with academia the same? Could you relate?
No, he was good. He really enjoyed school and he got good marks, but he needed he was on medication to help him focus, because he was just the trouble kid at school. So yeah, and then I'm on medication to help with my writing. So yeah, and that's been very helpful for me. So yeah.
And what was your parents' reaction when they found out?
Oh, not surprised at all. I think I think they just want to see me. You know, every parent just wants to see their kid not struggle at
Mm.
something. So, and seeing my brother, how it's affected my brother and helped him and supported him, they were pretty assured that it will help me as well. Writing has just been really tricky, and I think with basic stuff like text messages and emails and getting back to people, there's just so much anxiety around that basic stuff for me, that it's actually pulling me away from the work I need to be doing, which is, you know, painting and etc. So when you sort of start to see those, like you start to carve out your day and you go, geez, I spend like a good 3 hours trying to write basic emails to people that should take me like half an hour or at most an hour. You do realize how much time you're pulling yourself away from the work you need to be doing. So I think that that's when I started to ask for help and yeah, look at other options. And the Aerosmith program is fantastic for that too. So yeah.
Yeah, and it's funny how much we beat ourselves up for not wanting to or not being good at some of the most like ridiculously mundane tasks, like responding to
Yeah.
people in email or even just chores, you know? Like I remember just
Mm.
feeling like so much weight was taken off when I was thinking about all of these terrible ways that I'm, you know, I'm such a terrible homemaker and I'm so messy and my whole family must be so disappointed in me. And then I just remember at some point somebody
Yeah,
just being
the
like, who
self-loathing.
likes to
Yeah.
do dishes? Like, of course you don't like doing dishes. It's boring. Why would you like to do that? And I just remember just being like, oh, right. Like, that's absurd. Like, why would I want to be good at
Yeah.
those things? You know, like I'm putting all
Yeah,
of my
yeah,
focus
exactly. Yeah.
in the wrong places. And
Yeah.
I think we have a tendency to like put value into things that we can't do because like it's almost like it mystifies you, like other people are good at these things and so
Yeah.
and I'm not, so you put like an you put like an inflated value on those things and really some of those
Yeah.
things are like the least
So
interesting.
trivial.
Right,
Exactly.
exactly.
Yeah. Well, like, I goodness, I just remember, and I'm still like this, like, I'm just like, I have to, if I have to be somewhere on time, oh man, it's so hard. I remember I would get to the place like a day before, or like the wrong day or something, and then I would try and get there on the right day, and I'd get there 2 days after. Like it just wouldn't.
Oh,
It
I
was
know.
just so tricky arriving at a place, certain place and time on the right time. Yeah, it's just and you just feel yeah, those basic things are really hard. And friends as well is like I really, if I'm with somebody, I'm with them as well. But it's, I have to remind myself to really reach out to my friends, and it's not nothing, obviously nothing personal. You just get so focused on what is in your immediate world. um, yeah, so just hearing all that from your other ladies that you've interviewed as well is just really interesting. All those sorts of things that you relate to, little
Yeah.
interesting little things. Yeah,
Right. I'm endlessly amazed at how these like seemingly random struggles from throughout my life, you know, all play into this one diagnosis, like this one neat little package in such an incredible way. We were like, oh, right. You know, even just the term hyperactivity is something that so many of us don't relate to in the beginning because you think of like a little
yeah,
boy who's being hyperactive and we're like, well, that isn't me. I was staring at the birds. Um,
yeah,
right. But then when you start to kind of reinterpret hyperactivity and how it manifests itself in your thoughts and your brains and impulsivity and like rage and you know
yeah.
right, and it's like, oh yeah, okay, fine, I check all of those
I got
boxes,
this.
all right.
Yeah.
And now it's like, oh, I like really deeply relate to the hyperactivity element of
Yeah,
ADHD now.
yeah. The fusser king, the
Right.
intense fusser king.
Or just like
Yeah.
the mood swings and all of that,
Oh
yeah.
man. Yeah, I'm trying to not get so emotionally just like triggered by stuff too. So, but it's a double-edged sword for me because I'm an artist. So you
Yeah.
inherently the work that you do, you're just like you're you're inherently trying to like feel understood through your work as an artist, and then when you're working with people or clients or something, and you know, a debate happens or an issue happens, it's just it's very hard to it's a double-edged sword because you obviously it's very, you care about the work, very hard to take things personally, but yeah, that hyperactivity or that emotional irregulation
Right.
regulation. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I can't even imagine as an artist dealing, I just finished putting together a course and now I'm trying to sell it. And that's the part I hate the most is the self-promotion, the selling, because it's such an emotional roller
Yeah.
coaster. For 1 minute, I'm like, I send out an email and I'm like, okay, you can buy this thing. And then it's crickets. And then I'm like, I've made a terrible mistake. Nobody wants this thing. This is the worst thing ever. I need to quit.
What have I
And
done?
right, what have I done? I've made a fool out of myself. And then one person buys it and I'm like, yes, this is amazing. Okay, now I have to do this and I have to do this and I'm going to make that. And you go back on the track where you're just like, I'm going to do all of these things. And
Suddenly
then
your
that
commitments are
falls,
like this high. Yeah.
it's exhausting. And I'm just, so I mean, there's so much subjectivity when it comes to like selling and as an entrepreneur, right? And it's so like that is the thing that drives me crazy because I can't work for other people. I've just admitted that part. I just can't. I've tried it many times and I can't stick with a job longer than 2 years.
That's
So that part is
great.
out of it.
Yeah.
So I'm curious, like, I've had that issue with it as an entrepreneur. I can't even imagine that emotional roller coaster of being somebody who is so incredibly objectively talented as an artist. I mean, you are incredibly talented. So you must get
Oh.
compliments, on your work. But at the same time, I know as somebody with ADHD, what an emotional roller coaster it must be to then always sort of feel like, am
Yeah.
I actually, are people saying, like, what is the subtext and all of that? So
Yeah,
now,
yeah.
when
Well,
you reached
going
out
back,
to me, you had talked about like your sort of reflections on just on your path as an artist and looking back at how ADHD has played into that. So I'm curious,
yeah,
what
it's
are some of your
fascinating.
reflections?
Yeah, so going back to, you know, school and education, I left when I was just before year 12, and I remember going, okay, well, I'm going to study art, and that's who I'm going to be, obviously. And then I went into university on a through disability and portfolio, and I thought, okay, well, they should have some support there for artists as well who struggle with the written um, units, and I really struggled at uni. And again, it's just that whole theory and conceptual side that I really struggled at, because what I expected from university was technical, was learning the technicalities of painting and sculpture and fine arts. I didn't realize it was going to be so concept heavy, and I just associated that with so much writing, and also I found it really hard to do that deeper reflection of asking the questions beyond questions, and so I found that again, I took that on myself so personally, and I found like a bit of I found I was questioning myself after first year, and although there's quite a high dropout rate, I just got so anxious, and so I left, and I thought, well, I'm just going to approach art in the way that I'm craving, and then eventually I'll come back to uni when I'm ready, because it seems like I'm just too young to go to uni. So I did. I went out and I painted a series of portraits, and then I came back to uni the next year. I deferred for a year and then came back, and the same thing. I just really struggled, and so I thought, I sort of made a pact with myself, and I thought, well, look, I love the technicalities of painting. I love the skill involved, and I thought if I could just paint, if I could just focus on that and do that to the best of my ability, hopefully that will just speak louder than whatever conceptual underpinning I, I could come up with. So hopefully people can just sort of see it like that. And so I've just really, essentially, I just have focused on that for years, and I've gone down the path of hyperrealism, which is like very technically based realism. And so I guess, yeah, what I've realized though is I've sort of painted myself into a corner in some ways, because I've not, the art world is inherently fickle, and it, you need to be able to discuss your works and have, yeah, you need to be able to have a conversation about the work and your intent, and that sort of aspect of being an artist. It scares the crap out of me. And I'm really not good at it. So I've avoided that by one, going down the technical path, but then also just not practicing that. So now I'm going back to the books, and now I'm trying to like expose myself to theory and philosophy, and discovering what is it about painting that I love, and why do I paint, and all those questions, the stuff that I've never focused on. And it's hard. It's really, really difficult. But it's exciting as well. It's sort of showing me sides of myself that I'd never thought I would find challenging and rewarding. And it's really interesting. So sort of like a long answer to your question.
Yeah, no, it was interesting when you were talking. You were reminding me of Naomi Osaka and the kind of issue that she's going through right now with the cut that the tennis player who is refusing to talk to the media because she was protecting her mental health, and so she was getting fined for not talking to the media. And then there's been this and so then she had to drop out of the French Open. I think it was the French Open. Because she doesn't want to speak to the media afterwards because she finds it too stressful. Yeah. And so now at least the fact that she's taken the stand, you know, Nike and some other companies are like backing her. And now there seems to be this backlash against this forced, you know, the fact that athletes are forced to do these promotional tours and talk to the media and do these things that they absolutely hate doing. And they obviously feel a lot of anxiety and stress around it. And I'm like, and I really relate to that deeply, because I'm like, you're an athlete. Why this, you know, it's that same idea of like, you don't have to be good at everything. And that if these things are bringing you stress, don't do them.
Exactly. Yeah. It's like a threat. I think, it's like, it's actually a physical, it's like a threat on your body, completely. Because I would say to my lectures, which is no art lecturer would ever want to hear this, I'd say, oh, the art speaks for itself. And you do not say that at art school. That's a huge no. But I genuinely believe that. But it is, you do have to show up in ways that are so challenging.
I think communicating ourselves in a way in which we fundamentally feel understood can be so difficult for people with ADHD. I'm just listening to Sari Solden's book on women with ADHD, and she was talking about the same thing, which was like, and this book was written ages ago. This is one of the very first book on women with ADHD. And she was talking about, you know, how we tend to kind of clam up and be very quiet and kind of withdraw in social situations, because you often feel like you're betrayed by what's coming out of your mouth, because sometimes you can't even communicate your thoughts very well, and you never know what's going to come out, you know. And so she was talking about like,
that's such a good point.
Right? Yeah, and she was like talking about like avoiding social situations, because you can't predict what mood you'll be in when you enter a room, and you can't, and it's like, so for your own safety, you're just like, I'm not gonna put anyone in that position because I can't guarantee A, what's going to come out of my mouth, or like B, if I'm going to be happy or sad. Like there's so much about the way that we communicate that feels like a betrayal to ourselves sometimes, that often we just end up like clamming up, and then somebody's like, how are you? And then we just say, I'm good, thank you. And then, you know, and then we get labeled the quiet one, even though we are anything but quiet when given, you know, the the right
Yeah,
combination.
totally. There's so many situations I would go home and I'd just be processing what's just happened, and I'll be thinking, reliving the experience. And when I'm deep in a painting, often I won't see people, just my husband. We just see each other, and he's a writer director, so he's the same sort of like introvert as well. He spends like weeks in his room, and he just sees his wife and his cat. That's about it. And so, but then when we go into social situations, because we've been so in our quiet place for so long, you do have to really psych yourself up. But it's even harder because of your dispositions as well in social situations. So, which is great chatting with you, because it's good for me to practice talking. I think that's it genuinely is. Yeah, I love it. Which is
Well,
great.
I know, and I think that my husband is a bona fide introvert. He always says, he's always been one. And I used to ask him a lot, like, "What do you love about me? What I know why I chose you, but I could never figure out why he chose me." And he would always say ridiculous things like, "Well, when I'm with you, I feel like I'm by myself." And I'm like, "Well, that's kind of sucks." But as an introvert, that's like the greatest compliment, right? Because
Yeah,
he's like,
yeah,
I don't feel any, he was like, I knew the moment I met you, I felt no anxiety, I felt no awkwardness, like I just felt at peace. And that was like the best
yeah.
compliment an introvert could give. But for me, I was sort of like, okay, I guess
What?
that's a
Yeah.
compliment, right? Because I can never decide if I'm an introvert or not, because like I love one-on-one conversations. And I think something that I think a lot of us, I don't know if it's women with ADHD or just ADHD, but like I feel a constant desire to connect with people. So I can get very
Mm,
lonely feeling if I'm just like at home doing my own thing. Like I always feel like I'm missing out. That meme of like, I don't want to go to the party, but I
mm.
really want to be invited to the party.
Yeah,
Right. And so there's that
yeah,
sense of like always looking and searching. And I think that that's something that we have, a lot of us have that need. I know in ADHD 2.0, and I think even in the Driven to Distraction book, like they talk about connection and vitamin C, and how that is one of the biggest ways that we can actually treat our ADHD, is to talk to other people
mm,
with
mm.
ADHD and feel that connection and feel like we're not alone. And there are other people with these weird quirks who have trouble
Yeah.
brushing their teeth and like random things that you're like, oh, thank God I'm not the only one.
Oh,
Right.
yeah.
and
Me too. Yeah,
right.
that's it. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And how like that feeds us in a way that is not necessarily typical of an introvert. Like I think we
Yeah,
crave a sense of connection that never quite feels right a lot of the time in most social situations. And then you're like, oh, I just want to go
yeah.
home.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. It's time. Let's go. Yeah. No, that's so true. It's you don't even really need to say to somebody I'm ADHD or something. You just feel it. I feel like um, people with any sort of neurodivergence is like you just sort of you feel it in the room, and there's that connection. It's really really fascinating. And then when eventually it does come out that they're dyslexic or whatever, it it's just sparks just sort of happen. It's just you kind of go, oh, okay, there we
Right.
go. my
Yeah.
my friend, yeah, he sort of he was diagnosed later in life, and he's just he's like, I can't believe this is my whole life just sort of explained, and why I am the way I am. And yeah, it's so fascinating. Yeah, I think COVID as well, how you were saying before, how a lot of women are being diagnosed now later in life because of the lockdowns, and they're seeing it in their kids and reflected through themselves. It's just, yeah, that's very fascinating.
Oh yeah,
like one of the
right.
silver linings.
Well, yeah, and I
Yeah.
think now it'll be interesting as everything really sort of goes back to quote unquote normal, or hopefully not back to normal, but as we
Yeah.
start to like, oh, I don't want to return to what things were, but I think at the same time, like as we start opening up
CNAC.
and getting back into a more routine, it'll be interesting to see like, was a lot of this actually ADHD, or was it sort of just the trauma
Yeah.
of the pandemic and everything happening? Like, so, but then again, I think something that is very endemic to ADHD is constantly wondering if you actually have ADHD,
Yeah.
which then I'm like, I feel like that's usually a sign you have it. If you're constantly wondering,
Yeah.
is this actually it? And you can't stop thinking about it and you can't stop doubting, and you're like, I don't know. Like there's often times where I'm like, I don't know, maybe I'm just a feminist living in a misogynist world. And like we had Trump for the last 4 years. Like this, I have PTSD from living in this country. Like maybe that's all this
Yeah.
is, right? And so
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 much noise. Yeah.
right, but then I go back to the sense of like, no, the fact that I'm like manically obsessing over whether I have ADHD is pretty much
Yeah. No,
guarantee
that is
that
it.
I actually
Yeah.
have it,
Yeah.
right? But like you said, like finding other neurodivergent people, there is that sense of like home, and there's
Yeah.
and feeling like
Yeah.
so accepted, because there really is like the weirder the better, right? like
Absolutely. Yeah.
like we'll take it, whatever, you're in a safe place.
Yeah. Suddenly the conversation just branches out to just anything and everything, really.
I
Yeah.
know,
And
right?
then
And then like the
it's been three
humor starts
days.
getting weird. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. People start dropping Simpson quotes. Yeah, it's too good.
Yeah. Okay, so tell
Yeah.
me more about the Aerosmith program, because you had mentioned it in one of our correspondence when you said you were working on strengthening your neurological pathways. So I don't know anything about this
Yeah.
program. So tell me about it.
Yeah,
And how did you
it's quite
find
a
it?
mouthful. Yeah, so well, oh gosh, it's like another silver lining of COVID because my mum had been aware of this program. Aerosmith from Barbara Aerosmith created it, and and I guess her argument is that the brain, and this is back when people thought brains were fixed. I guess we were just born with brains that couldn't change. But her argument was there was neuroplasticity. So, obviously we know that now, but that's the bedrock of why Aerosmith is what Aerosmith is to help connect neuropathways that people had struck people. There is a disconnect there in people, and so my mum was aware of this program when I was little, and even sort of pitched it to me to go over to Canada and do the course, but it was just the wrong time, and I just thought no. But since COVID, they've started doing an online courses for people, which has been great. And I do an hour 4 days a week, and honestly, it's just it's been one of the best things because one, I can read clocks, woohoo, and then I've just felt like I've been able to progress in things that I've never been able to progress in before. And one of those things is writing. I can write emails a little better. I can listen. I can read books without in a noisy environment without and remember what I've read, which is nuts.
Wow.
And it's all those real simple little things that you just know that you need a very particular environment to do, but now it's a lot more easier to do those basic things. And it's fascinating. So all the students start off with clocks, and they start off with 2-hand clocks, and then eventually you do a series of exercises within the 2-hand clocks, like equal length hands. You decipher which one's the minute hand and the hour hand, and then you read the clock and try and get your time down as well. So it's about accuracy and speed. And then eventually they'll add another hand. So you'll have 3 hands, and then you'll have 4 hands. And then it goes all the way up to 10-handed clocks. So I'm at, I think, 4 hands now. So it's the way it's designed is that everyone learns at their own pace, and it's sort of tailored so that you feel like you're achieving something every day. So you get that sense of achievement, and every day is, you do have to apply yourself and work at it every day, but you feel like you get something back from the effort that you put in, which is great. And then you sort of notice that over the course of a week or a month, you've gone from here to there, which is just so, I've never experienced that at school. And I just associate clocks and that sort of mode of thinking with school and education. So I think for me, it's done more than just the ability to read clocks and decipher time and what it's trying to teach me, but it's done a lot to my sense of self and my own self-worth as well. Like, I've got a lot more confidence, and I feel a lot more calmer going into the things that I have anxiety built around. So yeah, the being able to, like, the fact that I feel like I can write an email, it means so much. It's insane how much that's changed my sense of self-confidence, really. Yeah. So I'll keep going with this for probably over a year, the whole course. And so every student starts clocks, but they have a sort of a cognitive assessment, which goes for, I think, for something hours. And then you, with that assessment, you sort of see the different areas that your strengths and your weaknesses are in. So I'm good at the visual stuff, but I'm really bad at the comprehension and concepts as well, time and reading and writing. So they're the kind of things that I'm going to focus on, and see what happens. So yeah, it's an
That's
interesting
amazing.
journey. Yeah, it's interesting.
So is the school specifically for adults with dyslexia, or is it just sort of they assess what your learning needs are in the beginning, and so it's really for anybody?
I believe it's for anybody, but I know a lot of the students I practice with have, learning difficulties. So it could be dyslexia, it could be ADHD. It could be anything. Yeah. And I think that the point of doing the assessment is to get a sense of how people's brains work, so that they can sort of accommodate whatever they need, really. But I've practiced with students who are like under 10 years old, and then my mum's going to start as well, which is really cool. So yeah, and she's in her 60s, so yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think that having students from such a wide range is for them would just be really fascinating, because they're adapting to different generations. So like for my mum, for instance, they've started a program that caters for, I guess they call them senior people, but it's to keep your brain active and sharp. So but for me, I'm trying to reconnect those neurological connections that are just not sparking, and I need them to spark. So yeah. And then some kids who are going through school, it's just sort of a bolster for their experience at school as well. So yeah, everyone goes in with their own intention.
That's awesome. Now, did you get ADHD from her? I mean, you got it from
I don't know. I don't know.
So has she now reevaluated her life and been like, oh, okay, this is starting to make sense now?
I put the question to her, and we just don't know. It's so fascinating. she thinks dyslexia has definitely come through her family, and because her dad dropped out of school early, and so did her brother, and they've all like foster kid, they've all focused on one thing, and they've been really successful at doing this one particular specific thing. So yeah, it would be interesting. But my brother and I are IVF kids, so I'm not sure if it doesn't come from my mum's side, it would come from my dad's. But I don't know the dad because that was the dad's side was the donor. So yeah, it's yeah, have no idea. It's a bit of a mystery box. Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I mean, my father's the obvious candidate.
Yeah.
But because he's much more of the, kind of scatterbrained, inattentive, pack rat kind of person. And so as soon as I connected the dots, I was like, oh yes, okay, I clearly got it from him. And my mother has passed away, and so I really wish I could have conversations with her about it. Not only because so much of my childhood she was very confused as to why I did so poorly in school, and like so many conversations, like she would say things to me like, well, not everybody goes to university. And I know she was trying to make me feel better at the time. It's not for everybody. That's like, that's what you would say as a mother to make your child feel better. But now looking back, I think like, God, like it was comments like that really like, my self-esteem really took a hit, because my self-esteem was so tied to my inability to kind of show intellect. And like you're saying with email writing, like you're sort of like, it seems like a little thing, but when that ability to communicate becomes so deeply ingrained in how you view yourself, in the world, and it's something you can't master when you're able to master other things. And I think that's what becomes so confusing to us, is the fact that it's like we can be very good at some things, but we put all of our focus in the things we are not good at, because those are the mysteries to us, those are the puzzles to us. And then you have a teacher or teachers who say things like, well, why aren't you consistent? You need to be consistent, you need to get A's in every subject. And then that emphasis, the sense of worth as you're growing up is on like your ability to be good at everything. And so which is just impossible, right? And so I think there are a lot of people who don't think that way. I think they're sort of like, I'm good at X, Y, and Z, and therefore I don't have to be good at A, B, and C. But I think for neurotypicals, we're like, no, we have to be good at everything. And if we're not, we will focus on the one thing we are terrible at, and that, our self-worth will become wrapped up in that one thing we can't do.
It's fascinating. Through school it was oh, she's like, I'm not good at anything else but art, and that was just the narrative I built. And so I put so much effort into art, which I mean has been good, because it's meant that I've arrived, I've had my own unique path. But it really reassessing the how you got to where you are now is such a journey, and trying to express yourself through it all as well.
Right.
No,
or you think about like elite athletes, right, who have put all of their focus and energy into being an athlete, and then they get an injury and their career is over, and you're just like, oh God, like you have to like completely rebuild your life, right? Like it's almost at that point you're sort of, I'm like, oh, I'm grateful I'm not really good at anything. Because now I don't have to go through whatever hardship it must be to lose that one passionate thing you're really great at. Did I lose you?
Oops, sorry.
Oh,
there we go. Yeah.
Yeah, right. It's so interesting the ways in which we gloss over immediately the things that we were talented in, and then only, our narrative becomes such a focus on the few things that seem to elude us. Like,
but I think, but culture sorts like, I guess the world around you reinforces that so much. Like, for instance, I finished this artwork that was a large artwork for an art prize, and it took me about 4 months to do, and I put all my eggs in one basket with this work. And when I got it done, and I thought, okay, I've literally had no income for 4 months, and and now it's time to get a job. And I thought, okay, well, I'll get something that can accommodate painting as well, so just a cafe job. And I've always done cafe work since I can remember. So, but I'm a bad employee because I'd just be casual. But then I would have a pinch point with my art, and I would just say, I have to go. So I would leave, and worst employee ever. And then I'd come back. So like my resume had like maybe 3 months here, 2 months there. I never had a consistent job. And I was like 26 when I finished this work. And I remember trying to apply for basic cafe roles, like just jobs, casual jobs, dishes, all that sort of stuff. And one, I was too old, and so I was too expensive to employ as a casual dishy. I couldn't get a job anywhere. And I thought, oh shit, I really have to make artwork. So I need to sell some paintings because I'm unemployable. I have no other skills on my resume. So yeah, the world which I've created for myself in art, I really have to make that work for me. So yeah.
Wow. Huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember when I was in my 20s, I had dropped out of university and went and ended up working in a ski town in Whistler. I don't know if you know Whistler in
Yeah.
British Columbia. There's a lot of Aussies come there because it's like the opposite,
Yeah.
seasons. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of Aussies and New Zealanders and Japanese skiers and snowboarders who all come there and stay there during the season, and then when the season's over they all go home to their own seasons. But like it's all snowboarders and skiers who live in this town, and so I would always waitress and work somewhere trying to make money, and I would show up for work on like a really great powder day, and everybody would quit that day because they would want to quit so that they could go on the mountain to do what they loved,
Yeah.
knowing full
Clearly.
well that the next day everybody would be hiring because everybody had quit the day before. And it was the weirdest culture because I was the only one who would show up to work and be like, well, this sucks.
What? Yeah. Suddenly I've got everyone's job.
I know, right? Like the only one in this town with a work ethic.
Yeah. That's hilarious.
So now if you could rename ADHD to something else that would be a little more relatable, especially to women, have you thought about something that you would call it?
It's a shame it's ADHD. I think all labels should just have cute animal faces on them, and every letter should be in the shape.
Oh my god, I love it.
Every letter should be in the shape of some sort of animal, tails and like. No, but no one can read it except for people with neurodivergence.
Oh my goodness, I love
something
it.
like that,
right? Big panda bears, an elephant. Oh, that would be fantastic. I think that's my favorite answer. I'm kind of getting bored of asking that question too, because I feel like we don't know. And then sometimes people ask me, like, what would you call it? I'm like, I don't know. I don't have an answer. That's why I ask other people.
This is why I'm asking you the question. Yeah.
But I don't know. I feel like I can't come up with a good reason. It's so complicated. I feel like ADHD, just the more I learn about it, the more complicated it is and the harder it is to even sort of explain to people. And I think, like I get more and more frustrated even talking about it with people who don't get it, like I've stopped trying to explain it to people because it's so often when I first talked about this diagnosis, I was so happy. And yet there were so many people in my life who were like, oh, I'm so sorry to hear about your diagnosis.
I know, yeah.
And I'm so like, sorry. It's not a terminal illness.
No. Yeah, I'm not dying. Yeah. I was expecting a high five, but it's okay.
I know, right?
Don't leave me hanging. Yeah. Yeah.
And even,
Yeah,
I talk
totally.
about this with my husband too, with our kids. Like, my son, we're going to get him assessed this summer when school is over, and he's my husband's very worried about the stigma, and is he going
Yeah,
to think of
yeah.
himself as lazy if he has ADHD? And I was like, you don't get it. Like, he's going to think of himself as lazy no matter what.
Yeah.
Right? But if he
Exactly.
can have a sense of where this is coming from and the why, like he doesn't
Yeah.
understand the importance behind the why of ADHD,
Yeah.
right? That just
Yeah.
having that explainer makes everything a little bit
It
easier. It doesn't mean we're
absolutely.
not gonna have emotional regulation issues or rejection sensitivity dysphoria or like all of these things that plague us, but I think it just makes it a little bit easier. Like I was saying with the long
Absolutely.
weekend and the that frenetic energy and the not being able to relax. At least I can be like an anthropologist, be like, here is the moment where Katie is
Yeah.
exhibiting this behavior.
The
um,
whole family can observe.
right.
Yeah, no, it's so true. If my folks are like, "Oh, don't worry, she's just can't emotion, she can't regulate her emotions, she can't express herself. Don't worry, it's just ADHD." I'll be like, "Oh, that would be so good. Thanks,
It would
mum."
be.
Or,
Although I would
but
probably also get annoyed and be like, don't tell me why I'm
yeah,
acting the way I'm
exactly.
acting. Don't tell me, it'd be like somebody being like, do you have your period? Do you have ADHD right now? Is that what's
Yeah,
happening?
too obvious. Yeah, 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 totally. No,
Oh,
I've got so much to thank from my parents. So yeah, they they're amazing. They're seriously amazing. Yeah, I'm sure the same with your folks as well. Just um, what they went through and what they didn't know, but they were trying so hard to understand and wrap their head around what was going on and how they just felt helpless. So I think the
yeah.
more knowledge, the better, really.
It has been comforting too when I've spoken to women who were diagnosed, 20 years ago as opposed to last year,
Yeah,
that there really was no idea about what it was 20 years ago. So even if you were diagnosed,
exactly.
people had no idea what that meant or what to do
Yes.
with it. There was still a
Yeah.
sense that you would like outgrow it, or
Yeah,
like,
exactly. Yeah, you'll
yeah,
grow out of it. Yeah,
right?
or you'll just, yeah, put in the weird club. Yeah, that's it. And which is,
So
cool as well. Yeah.
yeah, but it's
But
still just, yeah, it feels like we're all just kind of walking around as living experiments, finding out about this interesting crazy
yeah.
thing together, like we're all on this one drug trip together. Like,
Yeah.
whoa, that is so cool.
Yeah. So true. Yeah. No, it's fascinating with art because I I feel like a imposter in my own field, if that makes sense. Um, and I relate to people with neurodivergence of all backgrounds and kids, animals, all sorts of things. But I find that the art world is just so fickle, and quite often um, that's something that I'm learning to explore a bit more of, or just even explore the sense of what it feels like to be a bit of an outsider in that world, in that space. Um, uh, yeah, I'm not sure how to sort of explain it, but that uh, the feeling of being an imposter in your own field, or in never feeling good enough. Uh, yeah, that sense of never being enough.
Mm,
Um, yeah, yeah, it's a fascinating thing when things trigger you to feel like that. Um, uh, yeah, how do you handle with that feeling, that sense when that sort of comes up in you?
oh God. Usually I say I'm never gonna do this again. And I'm just
See
like,
ya.
I've made a terrible mistake and I'm gonna crawl into a hole. I don't think that was the answer you were looking for, but like,
I'll remember
um,
that. Yeah.
but it's the same thing of, I mean, with tortured artists, I mean, maybe there is some comfort in just knowing that this is part of the package, you know, like I think, you know,
Exactly. Yeah.
the one thing, my podcast has never, I've never pretended to like have the answers for anyone. And I actually feel like in some way that's kind of the appeal of these conversations, is that like a lot of the
Yeah.
time we're just digging through the garbage, trying to make sense of it
Yeah.
all.
Yeah.
And
Exactly.
and I think that is where the therapy is. Like I think that's where we start to really kind of um I wouldn't even say like that's where the self-improvement is, but I just feel like that is kind of how we heal, and that's how we learn about ourselves, and that's
Yeah,
how we
it's
grow.
annoying.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
don't think
Yeah.
being like, I'm going to figure out the 5 tips to being a
Yeah.
successful entrepreneur. Like I think we get stuck in that trap that the answer is always around the corner, and that somehow
Yeah.
we're going to figure it out and everything's going to be happy forever. And you know, I think if we stop trying to buy into that fallacy that you know is
Yeah.
achievable, and more so just feel like, okay, how can I just like you know, understand why I feel this way, or like, you know,
Yeah,
like
exactly.
this is, I'm pouring my heart out and doing something that is really meaningful to me, and then if I ask people, if I have the gall to ask people to pay me for it, there's just crickets. You know, and then it's like you know, but to realize that that's sort of a universal experience, if I throw that out there and you laugh with recognition, then I feel better about
Yeah.
myself, at least because I'm like, okay, I'm not the only person
Then
who's
we can,
experienced this, right? So
yeah. I feel like art is just is like one giant trip, or the creative process is, how to explain it. Michael Lernig did a really good explanation of it. He's this amazing cartoonist, and I really relate to this. I'm sure you will as well. But the creative process is like, you have an idea and you'll go about it, and you'll try and have this sort of eureka moment. You'll go about it, and then it'll all turn to shit, and then like you'll fall in a heap and you'll start crying and it'll just be the worst. And then you're once you exhaust yourself, you're just sort of sitting in this pile of mess. And then when you start to look around, you put the pieces around back together again, and something else evolves from that. But it's
mm,
just, it's a constant, you know, the path is never, oh gosh, it's never where you think it is. It always is. Or your path, the creative process for me is always, you just show up every day, you do your best, and some days you inherently feel like it's going to be a wall, and you're just going to have to just live with that, and work through it all. But some days it's fantastic, and some days you can just hyper focus all day, and that's awesome. But uh, yeah, having these discussions is great, because you just know the eccentricities within yourself. And yeah, and for your creative, for myself, um I know that I know how to sort of trick myself into painting and getting into the hyperfocal state, which is exactly where I need to be, because the works I do, they take a lot of time to do. So I need to be able to just commit to painting, and then over the course of a day, or you know, a week, see what I've painted, and then assess that and move forward. So but it's finding, for me, I love finding the structure. I love finding that sort of discipline as well, in a way, because it's so counterintuitive to where I want to what I'm naturally like, which is, I don't care about time. I don't like uh, don't like being consistent on anything.
mm,
Yeah, so it's that constant, yeah, it's that play between knowing, working on, and knowing, being committed to something for a long period of time, and working on that, which is so the antithesis of people with ADHD.
right. Well, I think there's also sort
In
of the
some ways.
project too. Like we get really, really interested in the
Yeah,
project itself. and then once it's done, you just have no connection to it. Like it's, we don't tend to wallow in like the finished product very much, right? You move on to something else
Yeah,
immediately, and people are like, look at this great
exactly.
did, and you're like, yeah, that was last week.
Yeah.
Right.
But now I'm on this thing. Like,
Right,
yeah.
yeah. But I'm curious,
Yeah.
with artwork, do you ever get like 85% done with a piece of artwork and then you're like, I'm done? Like, how do you kind of finish? Is there another level of commitment that is involved in sort of, getting over that hump
Oh,
and then actually having to finish it? Or are you completely engrossed until the very last stroke?
yeah, it's interesting. I think the way I paint, the hyper real sort of style I paint in, and the size, I sort of trick myself into you just have to commit. You just have to see it through. Because my works are usually like meters long. There's such a huge commitment that I just go, okay, well, that's my year.
Mhm.
And then as soon as I go into it, I go, oh, well, this face needs, it starts to communicate to you and it says what it needs. So
Oh.
that's the way that I approach my work, is you sort of, I don't necessarily have an idea of what it might look like. I go into the painting and it unpacks from there and it communicates with you what it needs. And sometimes that can be quite exhausting, because you'll do I'll paint in layers, and I might do 3 layers or something, and then you realize that it needs another 3 layers after that. So there's, yeah, I think you just feel, yeah, I feel I've always completed a work, because I think I get to the point, I go so far down the rabbit hole that the only way out is further in.
Mm,
Does
wow.
that sense? Does that make
Yeah,
sense?
absolutely. I mean, I can't relate to it on any level, but it's beautiful. It's very poetic.
Sounds romantic.
Right.
But you get there, you're 8 months in and you haven't seen anyone for ages, and you don't really want to see anyone because the studio's a mess and you're
It's
a mess, but
amazing.
you're
It's almost
just,
like space
yeah.
travel or something. You just like completely remove yourself, right?
But gosh, because these works require so much attention and time, you just have to trick yourself into staying focused. And one of the tricks I did was I got rid of my smartphones and I just had a burn phone, and so no internet, and that was great. And that's the only way I could have got that work done in the time frame I needed to. But uh, yeah, you definitely sort of, what's the word? You sort of come up with tricks and techniques to help keep you on track and focused. But yeah, there's a mix of, I think with my work, it's more. It's funny. There's a lot of deadlines in my work. There's a lot of structure in the way I paint, which is really strange. It's less emotion and less, because it's not abstract and painterly marks, it's precise marks, and I paint with little brushes, so tiny brushes. So for me, um, the, the painting process is more about the internal state and how I feel day by day, and the long-term commitment to getting that work, seeing the work through. And you don't even really, for me, I don't really even know when a work's really done. It sort of tells you at the very end. You sort of you get the sense of the work sort of coming to an end. And I'll turn to my husband, because he's got an amazing eye as well, and he'll point out the things I've been avoiding doing that I need to get done. And and it's fascinating. Yeah, I'll commit to maybe 2 days of just nonstop painting when you know that you're at the very end, and you just commit to those days, and it just tells you straight away when it's finished. Yeah, you have I have such a deep relationship with the painting by that stage that you form this language, this sort of bond with the work. That's fascinating. So, but then, yeah, like you said, once the work's done, don't want to think about it. So you're onto something else, or yeah. Yeah.
That's
So
incredible.
it's different. It's,
All right. Well, I feel like I've kept you longer than I should have. But thank you so
oh no,
much. This has been
thank
really
you.
fascinating to learn about your process and
Oh, I hope I
talk.
sound like I've just rambled the whole time. So thank you so much for
That's the beauty of these
uh,
conversations.
God, I hope I made sense. But no,
I know,
thank you
right?
so
And
much.
the beauty of these conversations is you ramble. You're sort of like, "Oh, I have no idea what I just said, but all right." And then when the podcast comes out, it'll be like you're listening to it with fresh ears. You'll have no idea what you said. You'll have no recollection of this conversation.
Crazy. Yeah, it was
And
one
so
giant
like
trip.
what
Oh
I
my
know, right?
God.
Like I go back to
Yeah.
edit it and I'm like, when I go back to edit the conversations, I'm like, oh yeah, that was so fascinating. Damn, we're smart.
Yeah, high five. Yeah.
But
No, this,
yeah,
yeah,
well, I'm so glad you
thank
reached
you.
out. This was really a fascinating perspective and yeah, really
Oh, no, it's been
interesting
so much
story.
fun. Yeah, thank you so much for your time. It's great.
Thanks.
And for having me on your show. Yeah, really, really, really delighted. So
Well,
thank you.
thank you for sharing your story. I'm so thrilled with the fact that so many women are so open about their stories and our unique struggles and the fact that they're helping other women kind of see themselves in our experiences and our stories. It just feels like so symbiotic for all of us. So I'm always so grateful for
Yeah,
that, right?
absolutely. Yeah,
Oh,
100%.